people who like to watch the session offline. And next we will start. As you may notice, today we have a quite interesting session. Today we will talk about documentation. It's not so hardcore as ordinary, but I see that this topic is going to be quite interesting for people. As ordinary, let me start by introducing myself. My name is Alexander Barmin. I'm Chief Software Engineer, have a couple of AWS certificates, and spent a lot of time working on our customers. Nevertheless, if you have any other questions or suggestions, please feel free to reach me by email or on Teams. I will be very, very happy to help if necessary. Of course, if you have any thoughts about talk you can conduct or anything you'd like to share with us, please reach me. I will help with preparation. I am really looking for new speakers for our UK engineering community. Let's move to the topic. This is what I'm going to talk about today. Just a few slides. We will talk about importance of documentation, why it is important, and how to do that with Markdown, how to draw diagrams with PlantUML, because it's very, very useful, how to prepare slides with Marp, and I will show just a few examples to you. It is a very lightweight session today. Let's start with top one. Let's start with importance of documentation. So, all you know that documentation is important because of a few different reasons. And the main purpose, let's say, not the main purpose, but the main idea why you should maintain documentation, for example, using Confluence or anything else, it is just because you will have a primary source of truth. Instead of Googling something, you can write a document and put it on Confluence, for example. And next, if you need to share some information with your colleagues, you can just send them a link. Instead of just, let's say, explaining everything every time, repeatedly, tedious, one by one, again. So if you, for example, see that a particular thing is useful for more than one person, it, I suppose, would be nice to create a page and share it with your colleagues. Another important point is that you having the documentation, you can align with your colleagues, for example, regarding expected quality or expected processes. And as you remember, there are a couple of things like definition of ready or definition of done. Just by having these two things documented somewhere, you're making your life significantly easier because expectations will be aligned. Again, the same thing. If you have new people who are joining the team, instead of explaining every time to everybody what you're doing, why you're doing that, and how you're doing things in your team, you can just share a link to Confluence or to anything else, and they will be able to read. Of course, I'm not saying that if you have Confluence, it doesn't mean that you do not have to talk to other people. It means that you have something where you're already aligned and all the expectations are documented. So I suppose everybody understands that documentation is important. And actually, there are many ways of doing and maintaining the documentation. Well, if you write in code, where are you going to write your documentation? Of course, in code, you can write JavaDoc, PyDoc, JSDoc, anything doc. And in this case, your documentation will be stored side by side with your code. It is always like almost always up to date, right? Right. Of course, what we're using right now, and as I mentioned many times, we're using Confluence for storing our documents. Not bad. Single point of truth, tracking of history, maybe even in modern versions, parallel edit by multiple people. Very good thing. SharePoint or literally Microsoft Word. Well, maybe it is not so useful, maybe not so convenient as, let's say, documentation is as code, and nevertheless, there are many benefits. We can maintain documentations documentation together, edit it together, and it is good for printing, because what you see, this is what you will get. Fantastic. So storing textual information in anything like this is very easy. We can even track the history, but working on software development, it is not always, and documenting software development, it is not always about writing text. It is also about drawing diagrams. And if we take a look into the software for dealing with diagrams, we will see that we have actually many things, but maybe they are not so convenient, or maybe they do not provide us with useful capabilities. Even if we have Draw.io, Lucidchart, or Microsoft Visio, it, for example, does not allow us to track the history. Yes, we can, for example, develop diagrams together. We can share it by sending files or links, but nevertheless, tracking the history is not so convenient. Even if we are talking about preparing slides, yes, we all have Microsoft PowerPoint, but if you have to create many slides quickly, PowerPoint maybe is not the easiest solution to do. Well, here on the slide, you may see that there is, you may see a list of pain points for maintaining documentation. And maybe it is a bit subjective, but I found these 4 points as the main pain points of having documentation in form of separate documents like Microsoft Word or Pages on Confluence, or maybe anything else, because I have to use different kind of software for different kind of content. If I like to write text, I'm writing it in Microsoft Word or Confluence. If I need to draw a diagram, I need to use anything else already. If I'd like to track a history, tracking the history again is not so convenient. And what's more important, or more complicated, is having a consistent styling. So that maybe it makes sense to take a look and understand. Maybe there are some tools which allows us to solve these problems easier. And of course, yes, because on a very high level, there is an approach which is called documentation as code, which says that we have our code and we have documentation. So why shouldn't we deal with our code in the same way as we're dealing with, why shouldn't we deal with our documentation in the same way as we're dealing with our code? We should have issue tracking, version control, very simple plain text markup, code review, and automate testing and building of something printable. My current topic focus today is on plain text markup, actually, because, well, you know how to deal with Jira to establish issue tracking, or with Git, or how to do code review or automating testing. So let's take a look and see what can we use for writing different kind of documentation using plain text markups. See, talking about plain text markups, what we have, if you remember, we have a best way of preparing. We have, let's say, the best markup language of all the times. It is XML and HTML, because in HTML you can express almost anything you want. But maybe it is good for representation, but not so good for, let's say, for maintenance, because, you know, markup in HTML is a little more complicated, and sometimes you need to follow a particular structure, like use table markup for tables, use div markup, use div container, or some semantic markup, and so on. Maybe HTML is not the best format, as well as TeX and LaTeX, because they are very good for documenting, but a little complicated. But what's left? Actually, we have two very convenient formats, Markdown and AsciiDoc. And actually, AsciiDoc is nowadays, it is one of the most popular, from my perspective, and from markup Markdown guide.org website. markup language because it's simple, portable, platform independent, and it is almost everywhere nowadays. Let's take a look what can we do with Markdown. So I will show some examples how to use Markdown, or maybe you can raise your hand if you already know how to use Markdown. So please raise your hand if you know how to use Markdown and know almost everything, and I do not need to show you anything. Yeah, I suppose almost all of us are using Markdown in one or another way, and I'm showing Markdown in Visual Studio Code because it's very useful. I can do this thing, Markdown open preview on site, but nevertheless, Markdown is used almost everywhere. If you open, for example, Confluence, you can still follow Markdown. If you a Markdown approach and Markdown markup, if you're using, let's say, Microsoft Teams, it also supports Markdown. If you're using Slack, it supports Markdown. If you're using almost everything, let's say Notion, it also has Markdown inside. So what you can do with Markdown, because on the one hand, it is and of course GitHub and GitLab. Because on the one hand, it is very simple, but on the other hand, it is quite comprehensive markup language. Idea of Markdown is very simple. You need to know just a few main concepts in order to use it. So the first thing I want to show is, of course, headers, because we need to structure our document and split into two parts. So if we're adding one single hash at the beginning of line, we will have a header of first level, header of the second level if 2 hashtags, header of third level if 3 hashtags, and so on. And next we're writing our text. Write text, write text, write text. So as you may see, text is still writing. Yep. If we'd like to split our text by string line and not to make our line so long, because it's possible still to do something like this, we can introduce line breaks at almost any place we want. If we'd like to start a new paragraph, we're adding an empty line here. Of course, in Markdown we have lists, list item, and it again a list item, list item. We can nest our list items. It is also gracefully work. We can have numbered list, list item, to list item, and so on. It also gracefully work. So as you may see, you can use this exact markup almost anywhere, even for example in Confluence or even in Teams. As a developer, I'd like to have a text or my code highlight, right? And here I can use a couple of options. For example, I'm writing some text like, if you want to go, if you want to invoke a particular function, please use caller class. And as you may see, if I'd like to make a very small insertion of a formatted text here, I'm just adding these apostrophes. If I'd like to introduce a code block into my text, what I'm doing, I'm putting 3 apostrophes here. And of course, I can start writing my code. Public static void main string args. It highlights. But nevertheless, as you may see right now, it is just a generic code block, and it does not have any special highlight for particular programming language. But I'm quite sure that this is Java, so that I can say, hey, buddy, this is Java. Please highlight it as Java. And of course, I can say, well, this is going to be an XML, and as a result, I will have a syntax highlight for XML, like top /top, and it is going to highlight it with different style. By the way, all this stuff is working in Teams as well. Another important thing, and another important, let's say not caveat, but trick, is how to insert links and images. Well, because if you'd like to insert a link, it is necessary to produce a little more markup, saying that this will be text of my link. This is going to be link of my link, http.google, for example, http://google.com. So if I'd like to have a link to Google, I'm adding brackets and another set of brackets here. And in the very similar way, I can insert an image. This will be an alt for my image, and here I'm putting some, let's say, path. I'm adding path to my image. This is exclamation mark at the beginning, which shows that I'm inserting an image. And here, as you may see, I have an image inserted. The main complication of dealing with Markdown is tables, because syntax for tables is not so convenient as it may be. If you'd like to add a table, you're adding header, another header, and another header. Next, you can show that, for example, in this column, I'd like to align my text to the left. In this column, I'd like to align my text to center. And in this column, I'd like to align my text to the right. And next, I have to write my text, right? Command cell 1, cell 2, and cell 3. Not very convenient, nevertheless, indentation is working. Why not so convenient? Because if I have a long cell with a lot of text here, it is not so beautiful, right? Luckily we have fantastic tools like Visual Studio Code, for example, or IntelliJ, which have support of Markdown, so that if you're writing your table, for example, markup here, and it is not pretty, what I'm doing, I'm just saving my file, and the Visual Studio Code will format it for me out of the box. Very useful, very simple. But as you may see, Markdown is good enough for simple text, but it is maybe not so convenient for writing big things like tables. Nevertheless, it is really widely used across the internet, and it is really widely used across the software we have. So even personally, I use Markdown a lot because I really like it. Another opportunity we have is AsciiDoc. Well, AsciiDoc is a bit more complicated stuff. For example, in case if you'd like to build your document in a more complicated or comprehensive way, like you need to have automatic table of content, or you'd like to build your document of pieces, or you'd like to introduce like document attributes by bibliography, footnotes, something like a Microsoft Word, but in text. And here you can use AsciiDoc. AsciiDoc is a bit more complicated. Let me show you AsciiDoc as well. So I have an example of AsciiDoc. One more thing, I forget to say it, to mention it, speaking about Markdown. Well, you see that by default, Markdown use .md extension. And for example, if you create a file with .md extension, it will automatically beautifully highlight it in VS Code. AsciiDoc. AsciiDoc again is a markup language, which is not so minimalistic. And idea of Markdown, AsciiDoc is that again it works gracefully from VS Code if you have an AsciiDoctor extension, AsciiDoc. But unfortunately, it is let's say it is not widely used in other tools like Jira, Slack, Confluence, and anything. But nevertheless, as you may see, it provides a little more examples, or not even examples, but a few more capabilities for formatting your text. Instead of hashes, you're using equal marks for headers. And next, AsciiDoc introduces his own concept. Main concept here is text blocks. You can, of course, write text right here. Some text goes here, and even write a lot of text, introduce new paragraphs, and so on, in the same way as for Markdown. But nevertheless, the strength point and main benefit of using AsciiDoc is because it allows you to have different blocks of code, blocks of your text. As you may see, if I'm putting 4 equal mark, it will interpret this block as a container. If I'm adding minuses instead of equal mark, it is interpreting this block as code listing. If I'm adding a special, let's say, instruction here, I can even make my text collapsible. And of course, I can introduce listing of code with syntax highlight and so on. But nevertheless, this format is very, very good for cases when you're maintaining documents in a group, or, for example, you need to combine your documents from different pieces. It is achieved by post-processor. In this case, if you're writing text in AsciiDoc, your post-processor is AsciiDoctor, and it allows us to use attributes like this. For example, at the beginning of my document, I'm declaring some common attributes, and in the text of my document, I can use it. Let's say after name is Alex, and here I'm using this placeholder in the text of my document. As a result, I'm getting text in my doc. Well, it's up to you what format to use. My personal preference is using using Markdown as much as possible, maybe just because the documents I'm writing are not so complicated to use AsciiDoc for them. Nevertheless, if you're maintaining documentation for the big project, maybe you need to take a look into the AsciiDoc as well. You may say that, well, I'm a hipster, and on the one hand, I write code in VS Code, IntelliJ, GitHub, GitLab, Jira, and Confluence, but I'd like to use something which supports AsciiDoc not only on my PC, but also on mobile. And yes, as I said, it is supported by many, many different tools, starting from Teams. And also there are a lot of tools like Markdown, Obsidian, Notable, Beer, Joplin, and there are a lot of them, which allows you not to only to write Markdown notes on your PC, but also sync with your mobile. If you have ever seen Notion, you understand what I'm talking about. It is just a OneNote, but Notion with Markdown support. Documentation and text markup is a simple thing. Let's go deeper and let's take a look into the modeling notations. Well, if you'd like to document your business process, what you can do? Of course, you can just open draw.io and put a few boxes side by side and connect them by arrows, right? Right. But if you're software development, more likely you're getting something like you can use something like a UML, which was initially designed for designing software. And here, actually, there are many. This is an example of BPMN, by the way. There are many libraries which allows you to draw UML by using text. Of course, I'm not saying that you cannot draw UML using tools like Draw.io, but let's take a look into it from different perspective. What if I say that it's possible to draw diagrams using code? Please raise your hand if you have ever drawn diagrams using code. No one? Ah, yeah, I see.
But I know from you once you told me just a little bit. But I still didn't have time, but I like really very much now show us in the details. Thank you.
Yes, good. I was very suspicious to this approach, but next I noticed that actually using code for drawing diagrams is a very convenient way, because you do not have to think about let's say, about how beautiful your diagram is. You have to think only about your diagram itself, about content you're going to show. So in order to draw the diagram, I want to demonstrate you quite simple thing, which is called PlantUML. PlantUML, in a nutshell, it is a library which allows to convert your code into diagram. And out of the box, it allows you to draw many different diagrams, all from UML, of course, but not only from UML. I will show examples for UML, and what I want to show you is that it allows you to draw not only UML. For example, if you'd like to draw a mind map, it is also possible to draw it using PlantUML. If you'd like to design quite small Gantt diagram, it is also possible to do that. If you need to design user interface, it is also possible to do that. Very fantastic thing. And many other things also can be designed by using code in PlantUML. Okay, so it's quite complicated to start using it, to be honest, but nevertheless, if, for example, if you're using, because it is necessary to install some software in advance. And here I really recommend you to start with VS Code and fantastic extension, which is called PlantUML. PlantUML introduces a support of PlantUML into your Visual Studio Code. If you're using IntelliJ, for example, it also supports PlantUML by installing an additional plugin. But for simplicity, as for now, I will show how to use it. So if you'd like to start using PlantUML, what you need to do is, as originally, create a file with, let's say, a sequence diagram. And I'm putting an extension of PUML here and opening a preview on the site. PlantUML, preview current diagram. There is no diagram, but nevertheless, let's start drawing it. Every PlantUML file starts with start.uml, at start.uml, and ends with end.uml. And some diagram name here on the top, let's say sequence diagram. I will start with sequence diagram. Because why sequence diagram is, why I like to start with it? Because it is very simple, and this diagram explains how some parties or participants are interacting and sending signals from one to another. You may think, well, it is a little complicated and I don't understand, but let's take let's image a very simple situation when we have an actor, which is user, when we have a participant, which is system, let's say front end, and participant, which is called backend, right? And what we're doing, we're sending signals from one to another. For example, user is opening front end, like send get request to get an app, an SPA, single page application. So what will happen under the hood, or what will we get as a result? Front end will send the user back some data, SPA, right? And my diagram shows it that this is request, this is response. If I'd like to show that something is happening under the hood, for example, in order to render single page application to have a server-side rendering, what I can demonstrate is that my front end is sending the request to backend in order to perform server-side rendering, and backend sends back to the front end some pre-rendered app. And actually, this diagram shows this complicated concept in a very simple way. Like, I'm sending request here, request next under the hood sent here, and I'm getting a response. Of course, I can make my diagram more complicated, and let's say that backend is performing some computation here in order to do a rendering. I also can introduce additional parties, like backend is talking to DB, and DB returns some data to backend here, and it again will be automatically introduced here. Very simple, but very powerful tool. This is one kind of diagram which I can use which I can draw with PlantUML. And also there are many different kind of diagrams which are also very, very useful. For example, I can draw class diagrams with my PlantUML. And in order to do that, I'm again creating a new file. Unfortunately, I cannot have multiple diagrams in one place. Class diagram. And here I am designing my classes, saying just like class, parent class without properties. For now, class, child class 1, and having child class 2. And well, I suppose my classes should be inherited one from another, right? So I'm saying literally that I want to inherit child class from parent class. And the same for the second. Surprisingly, majority of Confluence installations already have PlantUML plugin, so that it means that you can use this markup in order to draw diagrams right inside your Confluence. If, for example, I'd like to add some properties like property of type string, I can do that. If I'm saying that I want to have a method which returns string, I again doing that. And PlantUML is quite smart and can understand that if I do not have brackets here, it is a property. If I have brackets, it is a method. And draw diagrams like this. Very useful for designing your, let's say, APIs, for designing your data model, because there are many I forget the word, sorry. There are many, let's say, different prototypes. Let's call it this way. There are many different prototypes for different kind of boxes, let's say, for different display options. So if I'd like to introduce interface, I'm just saying this is interface, this is something else. What else we can have here? Of course, one of my favorite diagrams which we can do in PlantUML is activity diagram, because activity diagram is very useful because it allows us to demonstrate system and dynamic. Activity diagram, PlantUML, start UML, activity diagram, and UML, and I'm starting. My process starts with something, and next it goes to the first state. First state. Yeah, it should be here. But next, after the first state, I should have an option, like for example, decision. I, for example, would like to make a decision. Let's say, yes, go to the next step, or else. If I'm not mistaken, syntax is something like this. Syntax is a little more. If syntax is a little complicated sometimes, so if needs to go next, then and sorry, I need to and if I can say that in this case, in case of yes, I'm going to the next step. Next step, if else, no, I'm not going to anything. Stop the process. So as a result, I have a decision point, and next I can say that, well, buddy, that's done, that's end. Or here I can continue and say next step 1, next step 2. And have and at the end. That's all. if you take a look into PlantUML, you will notice to PlantUML website, you will notice that actually it supports many different diagram types. And what I demonstrated is very, very basic. If you would like to know more, as I said, please go to plantuml.com and see what is actually possible to do it with PlantUML, because it is fantastic from my perspective. It allows you to design your software in many, many different ways and show it from many, many different perspectives. I also have an example, if I'm not mistaken, it is here. For example, this is a demonstration when you have multiple components which publish some interfaces, for example, using REST, and another component is consuming your interfaces using REST as well. So let me check if it works. Come on. It should work. It also, yes. As you may see, it shows that one particular service publishes interface, another service consumes this interface. Very, very picturesque tool. And of course, you can build diagrams and convert these diagrams to pictures. The point is that Visual Studio Code does not allow you to convert your diagrams into pictures easily, so that you need to have PlantUML binary installed. What is PlantUML binary? PlantUML binary is actually a simple Java program which allows you to convert your PlantUMLs into pictures. And as you may see, I created my PlantUML file here and executed PlantUML for all the files which has a PUML extension. And voila, at the end, I have a quite beautiful picture of my diagram. Of course, you can create a file like this and run it from anywhere you want. For example, from your CI/CD pipeline. Like you wrote some text, and as soon as you did that, you're generating pictures. Why not? Because as you may see, I will also demonstrate that you can include your pictures, your diagrams, not only into Confluence or Microsoft Word, but also into your slides. But first of all, let's wrap up this part about diagrams. So this is the diagrams I draw using PlantUML, and I included them into my slide, just to demonstrate what is possible. So as you may see, the same diagram, but with alternative way here in the middle. Here, class diagram, activity diagram, component diagram, fantastic thing. And let's move to the last one part I wanted to show to you today is preparing slides as code. If you're attending the sessions for some period of time, you have already noticed that my slides are very similar every time. And you may ask how I achieved that. As a software developer, I doing almost everything as code, so I decided to design my slides as code as well. And before moving into this topic, I'd like to show a very good website. This is Reveal.js. Reveal.js is actually a framework which allows you to build diagrams on your own. And idea here is that you're doing your diagrams, and instead of having PowerPoint diagram at the end, you will have an HTML with your slides. Well, keeping in mind that HTML is code, and you can use anything else instead of HTML for designing your diagram, I started my investigation. And I noticed that actually I can use Markdown for creating slides. As you may see, Reveal shows that, well, I can use Markdown in order to have my slides. But as you may see, nevertheless, it is not very convenient because I have to write some scripts, I have to write some piece of markup, which is very similar to XML or HTML, not so convenient. So that I decided to go deeper and find out that there is another project which is called Marp, which allows me to write Markdown and get slides as a result. This is actually slides I've got from Marp. Let me show how it works. In order to use Marp, what you need to do is to, of course, install Marp first. And just if you'd like to install CLI, it may be very useful for you. Just go here and follow the instructions. So literally what you need to have is Node.js. And next, you can install, there are a couple of things, of course. You can install it as a separate application using, for example, Brew for macOS, or you can install it as a Node.js module. But next, if you'd like to have a convenient way of dealing with your slides, you can, of course, install Marp extension for your Visual Studio Code. I haven't checked if this extension is available for IntelliJ or anything else, because I primarily use VS Code for writing slides. So let me show my slides, which I write in Markdown. This is Markdown. These are slides. And key point is that at the beginning of my slides, what I have is this piece of meta information, which says that actually, which is not a simple Markdown file. Nevertheless, you see it has Markdown extension. This file should be processed by post-processor. And in my case, post-processor is Marp. And also I'm adding some meta information. For example, I'd like to have a footer on every side. I would like to have some header on every side and some information about me. So Marp, open preview on the side. And here, as you may see, just by adding this simple separator, I'm preparing my slides. By default, it uses simplistic white template, but if, for example, I'd like to do anything else and introduce another color for my background, I'm saying that underscore background color is the following. If I'd like to use to see what is written, I will use another color for my text. Of course, I can say for this particular slide, I will use blue color. And that's all. What I'm doing next, I'm inserting images using Markdown, very similar as I showed before. Exclamation mark at the beginning, next alternative text, and next link to the image. And that's actually all. There is one significant difference, maybe not so significant, but there is a difference that instead of alt, I can introduce special instructions, which says that this particular picture should be set on the right-hand side of my slide, and it should be considered as background. Of course, I can say that this picture should be put on the left-hand side, or maybe it should not be so big. And I'd like to configure and say that height of this picture should be 50%. So, as you may see, just by changing small piece of code, I have a different representation on the slide. Or I can use it as a big background in the center of my slide. What else is interesting? Next part, which is interesting, is that I can use almost everything I want in my slide, which I have in Markdown. If I want to have a list, I'm just adding list. If I want to have a code inside my slide, what I'm doing, I'm just writing Java, and it will be automatically highlighted, public static void main, and here I have Java. Of course, I can write JavaScript, why not? Public main. Guys who write JavaScript, does it look like a JavaScript? Or it should be something like function, func, or...
No, it looks better.
Now it looks better, like a modern JavaScript, right?
Yeah.
Good. So as you may see, I'm getting slides right out of my code. I noticed that it requires some learning at the very beginning, but next it became a bit more convenient, especially in case if you need to do a template-based slide where, for example, text is on the left-hand side and picture on the right-hand side. A little more complicated when you'd like to integrate, for example, your slides with your diagrams. And here, unfortunately, you have to use some scripting. Because, well, you see that some of my diagrams, some of my slides have diagrams on the right-hand side. And these diagrams are generated by script, by this fantastic script. So if I'd like to insert a diagram into my slide, I have to create a diagram in Markdown, next run the script, which will generate picture for my slide, and next using text markdown markup insert a diagram into my slide. Nevertheless, on the other hand, it has a significant benefit because as soon as I update my diagram and run the script, it will be automatically updated in my slides as well. Well, sounds good, but you may say that, unfortunately, my boss does not accept Markdown slides, right? He needs my boss needs something like a PPT or not even, if not PPT, but at least PDF. And here, of course, I can use Marp CLI in order to generate these files. So I'm saying Marp, slides.md, and please output to slides.pdf. And what will I have as a result? Oops, I need to do allow local files. As a result, I will get a separate PDF with all my slides converted from Markdown to PDF. Please show what you see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All my slides are in PDF. As you may see, they look completely the same as before, but in PDF. And I can even generate PPTX if I need PPTX. And I will have a PowerPoint presentation out of my code as well. Come on. Unfortunately, sometimes it takes time. I don't know why, maybe it performs some magic. I do not think, but nevertheless, this is my PowerPoint presentation. The one single drawback I see is that files which are generated are quite big because it does not compress images for me. But anyway, it is possible to add additional flags saying that, well, I want to compress images, introduce PDF and PDF notes, and so on. There are many flags. If you take a look into them, you will see that it's possible to configure output quite flexibly. Nevertheless, instead of doing slides, you can do code of your slides and you'll get slides as a result. And of course, demonstrate them somehow to people. For example, right now, I'm showing you my slides, which are generated from text. Useful. To sum up, documentation is important, and actually there are a lot of formats which allows you to write code instead of, let's say, documentation and good, quite pretty output. Like you're writing plain text with Markdown and get well-formatted docx or PDF as a result. You're writing markup for PlantUML and get pictures at the end. You're writing Markdown with Marp instructions inside, and you're getting PDFs with all your slides. Very useful. Many questions. Maybe there are any questions, but I don't see any questions in the chat.
Yes, I have a question.
You're welcome.
So first, thank you very much for what have you told us. And second, maybe I'm going to ask you something of magic, maybe. That's here the question. there are some libraries, some Java library or things like that that might be generate a PlantUML or plain text on the markup diagram from what I don't know, some kind of software can read from just directly from the code and generate a diagram, a PlantUML, and maybe later we can modify a little bit to adjust if in case maybe the software didn't interpret it completely correct with the code we wrote. I don't know if I've been explained. I try to say better. Just I don't know. We could get some library from Maven, for example, to run this kind of software that is going to analyze our code just directly, the code as we wrote, and the program could generate a markup, things like that. And maybe it might be not completely precise what is generated, but we could have a look at the diagrams. And yes, things like that. For example, an instrument similar to JavaDocs, for example, no, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of directly produce a JavaDoc, produce some markup, some Markdown languages that after we can manipulate easier. I don't know. It just maybe something to magic.
Very good question. Thank you very much for asking that.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I have a few.
Because I'm very lazy to make it. So I said, if there is something, you know, very beautiful. Yeah.
Well, there are a couple of things. Yes, I know that a lot of software allows you to analyze your code, like IntelliJ allows to analyze your Java code and draw diagrams like this. But I have never tried to generate PlantUML diagrams from this. That's true. So if you know something, people who is on the call right now, if you know something which allows to analyze code and generate PlantUML, you can share. However,
yeah, that was a question actually. I didn't know, but sorry, I can look anyway. I can try to get. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I do not know. I do not know the answer because
anyway, I didn't know anything about the PlantUML and this kind of stuff. So for me, it's just enrichment, personal enrichment. After I can look okay if I can find some mixture.
Yeah, maybe there is something. However, there is one thing I want to share with you because some time ago, I was working on a quite interesting thing for my wife. She asked me if we can go to the database, read metadata from it, and draw database schema based on the metadata we have. So that's some time ago I wrote as Java application. It should be somewhere here. Database metadata extractor. Yes, this is the tool which allows to generate PlantUML diagrams from database tables. Quite interesting stuff. And also what I did next is that publish these diagrams from to Confluence. So if it is something which may help you, you can take a look into it. If not, that's absolutely fine. So this is simple application I wrote some time ago to analyze database schema and generate PlantUML diagram of your database schema, and next publish it to Confluence. If you find the bug, please raise it.
my best compliment anyway. you dream to build something magic, and actually, I mean, you start to write just. I mean, this might become in the future a kind of patent. You know, if you enlarge a little bit more as the project, I think you could sell for a lot of money, basically. But it's a good start. Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe some will be useful. Yeah. Database metadata extractor. Yeah.
It doesn't support many different databases. I have not have not completed work on it. I was working on modularization in a particular way, and right now it supports only Oracle, but nevertheless, it was a small tool written on let's say, very, very quickly to resolve a particular task. Maybe it may be useful for you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, incredible.
Good.
Don't have any other
Ian,
questions.
thank you very much for asking. Maybe there
Thanks to you.
Maybe there is any other questions on the guys who is on the call. Please let me know if you are not, if you're still here.
It's still here.
Yeah, we're still here.
Yes.
Don't know any questions. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Good. In this case, thank you very much for joining. I hope you enjoyed that, and you will get I will send an email with the recording. Recording will be uploaded as ordinary to video portal, and I will ask you to write some feedback to me. If you do not have any questions, thank you very much for joining. Have a happy Tuesday. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.